It must be said that there are only very, very few undergraduates in the kind of peer groups that I'm referring to. Most of the people that knew each other and were related somehow or other to Sid simply were born here and went to school here. Very few regular members were visiting us, so to speak, as undergraduates. With their ridiculously short terms. But then I can talk because I was an undergraduate here. I studied English literature. Well, no, that's not true. How could somebody lie about his undergraduate studies, you're wondering? I actually elected to read natural sciences because my father was a biochemist at this university. And nobody ever said, you've got to do natural sciences, David. On the other hand, they didn't say, have you ever heard of the arts? So it took me a while to realise that I didn't have to do zoology, physiology, neurology, anatomy, and one or two others. Oh, and biochemistry, just like Dad. So after 3 weeks, I went to my tutor, and I said, Sir, I'd like to change to English literature now, please. And he said, all right. That's what you could do in those days. He had absolutely no kind of evidence that I was going to be remotely useful in this newly elected subject. We are entering now a network of streets adjacent to Christ Pieces, only one of which I will ask Brian to take us down, because that's where an important person and an important house are. Well, the person has now moved on. You probably know Storm Thorgerson, who I believe is in town tomorrow doing a signing of his books. I'm not quite sure if he's doing it at Borders or in the venue where his exhibition is. I would have thought the latter. I don't know. Here's Earl Street. If you could just park momentarily, Brian, please, outside number 19, which is on the right halfway down, possibly just before that scaffolding. This, ladies and gentlemen, is an imaginative exercise insofar as what you're seeing is a house. I could have told you it was number 23 and you wouldn't be any wiser, would you? Because it's just another house. But Storm Thorgerson, whose father was Norwegian, as you might tell from his surname, lived here with his mother Evangeline, known as Vangie, and the two parents separated just when Storm was about 12 or 13, I think. Vangie continued to live here and lives here. I went to her 90th party in Belsize Park Town Hall about 6 months ago. She's in very good nick. The two reasons I think why it's worth pausing here until we have to move on. Namely, that one is that Storm's father was a communist, and Vangie was extremely bohemian. And of course, the further back you go through the 20th century, being a bohemian becomes more and more unusual, and more a strong side of independence. And Vangie had or maybe still has, I don't know, a pottery in the back garden where she used to throw pots. She was, compared to some of our parents in this peer group, very, very liberal. We could do things here that we weren't allowed to do in our parents' houses. So after the pubs, some of which I spoke about to some of you on the last tour, the Criterion, notoriously in the centre of town, no longer there, we would simply walk across Christ Pieces to Storm's house around about 11 o'clock, something like that, go up to his room and lie on his bed and smoke cannabis and read Marvel comics, and also discuss the issues of the day, which were sort of loosely tied up with the rapidly emerging, surging alternative culture. Nobody obviously could say, yes, we are in the middle of an emerging alternative culture, although you could a bit later on, like Harry Enfield does with what's his name, when he's being that naughty boy. She says, good evening, Mrs. What's it? You didn't have to do that with Vangie. And Storm felt, nevertheless, that Vangie wouldn't particularly approve of the cannabis smoking. So I'm sure she suspected it, but it's not as if we wandered round the house. We would chatter away eating Weetabix in the basement. I think we can move on, Brian, if you need to get out of the way. I was in charge of giving out the biscuits, and we would pound a milk bottle onto the back of their hand, like that, which I remember doing to Gilmour. But school in those days was a very violent affair. But then not as violent as home, hey?
It can't be that bad if they get chocolate biscuits.
Used to go after school and simply lie around on the riverbank up there. Unlike those of us who went and lay around over there. That would have been an absurd inversion of a rigid hierarchy that I had constructed. You have to say, if we're talking about privilege, that to live in this particular area of Cambridge is highly desirable. I suppose the only problem with this area is the houses are quite small, but not all of them. But I mean, how gorgeous is this, yeah? Given that 100 yards from here we're on the edge of the Gloucester Meadows, and the imagery of the river and the meadows permeates a lot of the Floyd's work. And of course Storm, in his hypnosis incarnation, has done a lot of imagery based around scarves and bikes and gowns and rivers and so forth, echoing some of the references in some of their work. Now, here's just a little cottage. There's nothing really, it's just a 2 up, 2 down, you know, it's probably got the outside toilet. But that's okay, because I would say just about that David Gilmour is more successful than me. So it figures, doesn't it? It's Darwinian, isn't it? So this is the magnificent house that Gilmour grew up in.
I interrupt. So
please do.
The owners say that the porch wasn't there in the 60s, so it has been added since.
Oh right, it's quite a nice little addition, isn't it? I mean, it's fitting. It fits the tone of the house. And so I imagine that when he was at the Perth School for Boys, as with many schoolboys and girls in this town, it was a bike ride, and he would have biked, probably, straight across that little bridge, by the swimming sheds that I refer to, up Brooklands Avenue, and then turn right into the Hills Road into the new Perth School, or in my early days there, the Perth School was opposite the Catholic Church. Who doesn't actually live in Cambridge here? Oh God, most of you don't live in Cambridge. Well, that's good, because I can say what I want. But, I mean, if you're in here for a few days, you want to walk back to this area, and if you see those two people there, they're walking down to a lane which leads in turn to a riverside walk, and it takes 20 or 25 minutes, and you're in Grantchester. And in the summer, it's an amazing walk, because the Orchard Tea Gardens are literally at the end of this lane, and you can have a nice cup of tea under cherry and apple trees in an orchard. It's a fantastic thing. Rupert Brooke, of course, hung out there, and it was the Grantchester clock to which he referred. I sound like a proper tour guide now. I would recommend that walk, even this time of year, because it's ever so pretty. And you see why people bang on about the river, because the willow trees are in good nick, and it's up here. This is the upper river, so called, and it's along the upper river that undergraduates traditionally hunt with their girlfriends in the small hours of the morning after the May ball, in order that they may have sexual intercourse underneath a willow tree, hopefully securing the punt with a rope at either end. Before doing so, I'd like to just make it clear that I've never done this, but I would have. The Mayball tickets were expensive even in my day, but I'd have to say that when I was in St John's College, I already had loads of friends in the town, and it's not good to go to the same university town as you were born in, because the incentive to make new friends is lower